off in the corner. Hello, everybody. For today's video, I am joined by my husband, Sean, and our friend, Marcus, and we are going to be chatting about how Booktube impacts the, quote, average reader, which even that word is something we're going to get into and what that means to us. And I just want to have almost like a disclaimer that for the sake of this video, we'll be saying Booktube, but you could easily replace Booktube with Book Community or Book Talk or any online book circles. But I want Sean and Marcus to both have the chance to basically define themselves. Would you say you're an avid reader, an average reader? And do you think being involved in Booktube in some capacity has affected whether you're a viewer or you dabble here and there and watching that kind of thing? So how would you define yourself? And Sean, I'll let you say something first.
All right. Well, so I think average is a hard word because I think I read more than the average person. Like if I went up to someone on the street and said, "Hey, have you read a book this week?" They'd probably be like, "No." But in terms of Booktube like consumption, people who read a lot, I do not read a lot. So but you know, I think last year I read like 40 books. I feel like that's a pretty high number. So
and you're not somebody who sets reading goals necessarily,
No,
and you don't have a good read. So yeah.
No, so I like to think I'm above average, but maybe I'm below average for Booktube consumer.
And how much would you say you've interacted with Booktube?
This year I'd say like 0%. I haven't watched like any
aside
Booktube.
From this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I have, it's definitely like affected things I've purchased, you know, like, oh, this person likes this thing, I'll buy this thing, I'll read this thing. But not recently. Like I don't even remember the last time I watched like a book review or, you know, something like that. It's been a minute.
I think part of it too is just that there's not as many people making videos for the kinds of things that you read. And the ones for what you read are, you know, 3-hour-long videos about one book. So
that is true. Not always, but sometimes.
Not always, yeah, but sometimes they're a little different than maybe other circles. Marcus, how much would you say you consume Booktube? Would you consider yourself an average reader or a bookworm? How would you define yourself?
Yeah, so I feel like I pretty much fall in the same category as Sean, except for the consumption of Booktube like media, like social media stuff. That's constant, like to a detriment, because I consume more than I read, and I have a lot more books than I actually read. But I watch, you know, Booktube videos every day. If like a new video pops up, I watch that said video. Yeah, I mean, like on Instagram, I have a lot of book people that I follow. Like, oh, I'm always trying to find like hidden gems and like stuff that like I've never heard of before. And like yeah, but I don't read enough. But like Sean was saying, compared to like an average like person, again, walking down the street, hey, you know, how many books did you read last year? I probably read, I would say, a little more than average. But I mean, compared to my wife, compared to, you know, people on Booktube, I don't read nearly enough. I think I was in the same ballpark as Sean last year, maybe 40, 45.
Yeah.
I go on these like weird, like, you know, man, I read like 3 books in 2 weeks. And for me, that's a lot. I'm like, wow, I really enjoy reading. Yeah, exactly. Wow, I'm doing great. And then I'll fall off. It'll take me like a month to read 1 book or 2 books a month. Audio really helps, but yeah, I would say I'm in the average, but like compared to the Booktube community, now I'm way below average.
Yeah. I have a obviously slightly different relationship with Booktube than both of you, given that I make videos. And so just making videos, I think, helps keep me almost regimented. Like I'm always looking ahead at the next thing. I'm always planning. I'm figuring out what would pair well, especially because I try to have a decent balance of backlisted new and things like that. So I do think that in making videos, it helps me stay organized in that sense. But as far as watching other creators at this point, because I'm friends with a lot of people, I just talk to them. So I oddly don't necessarily watch content as much anymore, because the second I start to watch one of my friends' videos, if they start talking about a book that I've read and I'm interested in, or that I have heard about and I was curious of thoughts, and if I want to talk to them more about it, I just pause the video and I start sending them a message. And then I'm like, well, now I feel silly. I should just talk to them, because now it's going to be weird if, you know what I'm saying? There's just this, like, I could just go talk to them feeling. So I don't know how much Booktube affects me in that sense. But I still see, obviously, people at the end of the year doing stats and people posting on Instagram and things, and they'll talk about how many books they've read, or talking to my friends that are on Booktube about how many books they've read. And I often feel so behind. I don't even feel like I read. Not that anybody makes me feel bad, so this probably isn't the right way to put it, but I almost feel like I don't read enough compared to others, especially since I do this for a job. It makes me feel like I'm definitely not doing enough. But I would say I'm not the average reader. I think that's probably a fair statement.
Sean, would you say you get more recommendations from Instagram or YouTube, or neither?
I think because I do anticipated releases every month, that I kind of sort of am my own source of books that I'm looking to check out as far as the newer stuff goes. But then Instagram, I think, is better for me anyway, about finding maybe indie stuff that I'm interested in, or books that are not as much in the Booktube circle, because in talking to a lot of people on Booktube, we do start to talk about similar things, or we want to read the books that our friends like. And Bookstagram can kind of have a different, Bookstagram is kind of a nice in-between of Booktube type books and book talk type books. So I do feel like there's something different over there. As far as backlist, I think a lot of it is just stuff that I have wanted to read for so long. But I do want to see what, because both of you were saying, well, I think maybe a little more than the average reader, but then not as much as booktubers. But what would you even consider to be the average reader? And do you think that that line has shifted since watching Booktube or consuming book content? Marcus, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure. I mean, I want to say, like, on the average, like, compared to my friends, they don't read at all. And even I have a friend who does read, and he maybe reads 2 to 3 books. Like, he enjoys reading, he wants to read more, but his schedule just doesn't allow him to. So maybe he read 2 or 3 books a year. So for me, like, I'm like, whoa, Marcus read like 40 books in a year. That's a lot. And I think on average, like, what it feels like in the Booktube community is like, at least, like, it's, the goal is like always 100, and it's either that or just below 100 books. Whether you consider novellas or, you know, whatever as a part of it, they like try and hit that. It seems like the milestone, but just below that, maybe 90, 95 is like the average. That's what it feels like when I'm watching like Booktube content.
Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's, I don't know. If someone describes themselves as a reader, I would think they hopefully read like 10 books in a year. You know what I mean? Like, if you're like, oh, I'm a reader, and then you read like nothing, I'd be like, why do you think you're a reader then? You know what I mean? So like, I don't know what that number is, but I think if that is like an identifier for you, you know,
the definition is someone who knows how to read.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, I'm a reader. Like, if I, like, it'd be like if I was like, I'm a really big Diamondbacks fan, and like, oh, how many games do you watch? I'm like 0. And then they'd be like, I don't think you're a Diamondbacks fan then. You know, that's kind of what I feel like. So
Marcus is like, I want to jump on the sports analogy.
100%. Great analogy.
So I guess for me, it's like, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what the magic number is. I think if you read a book a month or maybe a little less than that, I'd be like, oh yeah, you're, or if you like, if I see someone who brings a book to work, I'm like, okay, you're probably a little more than the average like person because you're bringing something to read on your lunch break. This is a really long answer. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know. I don't know what the average reader is.
And
I think I certainly 100% read more than the average person. Now, whether I read more than the average reader, I don't really know. Right. I don't know what that means.
Well,
what was the second part of the question? I don't even remember.
Has it changed since engaging with book content online?
I don't think so. I think that's what I'm saying is I think if you call yourself a reader, then I would expect you to have like knocked out some books in the year. I don't think that changes one way or the other.
I do think just because I know how some of what you've said can come across, that if somebody calls themselves a reader and they don't read that much, you're not going to be like, excuse me, you don't get to apply that to yourself. Like you're not going to gatekeep the word, but just because of the nature of the question, I think it almost invited that sort of a wording. But I do think if we were to look up the stat, isn't it something like the average American reads one book a year or something like that? So, and that's average American, if that's correct, not average, reader.
But
if somebody were to qualify
I guess
themselves.
like I'm trying not to be offensive. Hopefully I'm not being offensive, but I play video games, but if someone said, are you a gamer? I would say no. Right. I mean, I don't play video games enough where I could be like, I'm a gamer. I don't think that's like something that I can, be like, that's me. I like watching you play and I like playing Smash Brothers. That's like my level of gaming.
Yeah.
And Red Dead Redemption 2. But like that's kind of, Smash Brothers, Red Dead Redemption. That's kind of Sean's lane. I'm not sure if that would say I'm a gamer if that's my lane.
So
I do want to say one thing though. I think like we are talking about books right now, but I do think there are a lot of people who read news or read magazines or whatever in some sort. So I think that's something we can't discount. There are people who are plugged in other ways.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is a lot of people, it can turn into a gatekeeping thing depending on if a person like Marcus, you were saying, whether people include novellas. And then there's also the argument, which I don't think any of us care about, but the idea of do audiobooks count and things. And then when you get into the gatekeeping territory, it can just completely derail the value of books in people's lives. It just feels so besides the point. But I just wanted to ask the question of what we even consider to be the average reader, just because I think our perception when we're in sort of the Booktube bubble does shift, because when a lot of my friends are readers, and then when you talk to, like Marcus, you were saying you have that one friend who would consider themselves a reader, but maybe they read a couple things a year. And I feel like there might almost be a sense of not snobbery, but a little bit, if somebody is a bookworm, where it is that identifier like Sean was describing, they might potentially look down on that person like, well, you're not actually a reader though. And I guess almost, not that I'm disagreeing with you, Sean, but I feel like you play enough video games that you could use the word gamer in the same sense that, Marcus's friend could say, oh yeah, I love to read, but they maybe just don't get the chance to read that much. And also just people go through phases in life and they get really busy, and maybe reading's not something they have the time for, but they still love to read. And thus they would use that word for themselves, even though they're just in a phase currently where they can't pick up a book that much. It's like Sean and I are both musicians, but we haven't exactly been picking up our instruments as of late. So would we suddenly not be musicians anymore? I think it's just a matter of whether you have a enjoyment that stems from reading and a like of reading. But anyway, again, I just wanted to ask that question so that we could kind of grasp how we even consider the word and its application. I definitely think I have to monitor myself sometimes, because I get so caught up in the Booktube bubble, that if you're talking to somebody who's like, oh my gosh, I love to read, and it's not anywhere near what the booktube circle is like, to not be like, oh, well, you know,
I mean, do you even like
Yeah,
do you even like books? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like you're a poser. Because then I think another reason why this is an interesting topic currently is because of the fact that book talk has made reading trendy, and it's an aesthetic now, and like hot girls read or whatever that, I don't know. I'm not on TikTok, but you see that as a thing now. And I think there's this odd idea that people who say they like to read are just posers because they're trying to look cool and they're trying to be that smart girl with, you know, I don't need to go on and on about, because I don't want somebody to be like, those are all things that apply to me. but you know, the idea that people have when they think of that. This turned into a philosophical conversation.
That's what we're trying to do.
Really. But I feel like these were all just sort of the introductory portions of this, and then now getting into more of the nitty gritty. Kind of in line with what I was asking, do you find that BookTube looks down at the average reader, or for the most part, do you find BookTube uplifts readers all around? And the reason that this could be a whole video in and of itself, but I want to add some context. So I've noticed there seems to be an uptick in the last, I don't know, couple years, especially with book talk being such a thing, where people will say, I read this fill in the blank book talk book, so you don't have to, which I'm not saying it's inherently bad or cruel or anything like that to make videos like that, but book talk has taken the place of the word popular. Instead of saying I read this popular book, it's I read this book talk book. And then there's always kind of added to it some kind of ridiculous type of book, like satirical or super ridiculous smut book or something. And there is sort of this idea of, look at those silly book talk book people, even though not that long ago, I think people viewed BookTube in that way. So I personally feel like, and it might just be that I'm in the bubble and I'm hypersensitive to how I come across or how we as a community come across, but I feel like we're leaning into territory now where it's, I don't know, it almost feels high school like, where, well, we don't fit in with the cool kids, so we're going to make fun of what the cool kids like, and we're going to act superior and like we read more intellectual things. And I always find that to be ironic when bookworms take part in that, because I'm like, you know, somebody thinks that your fantasy books are dumb, right? Like, you know that this could go on and on and on. But anyway, so there's some context for this question. Marcus, what do you think?
So can you repeat the question?
It's right there on the screen.
Oh, no, whoa, hello. Okay, do you find the BookTube looks okay? Sorry. I mean, I don't think it looks. I think the biggest issue, at least for me, and I would guess if a lot of people feel with this, like on the social media side and like the BookTube side, I think we have a tendency to compare ourselves to others. So for me, I mean, I'm a competitive person in general. And I want to be a part of the conversation. When I was a kid, there was AR points. You know, you guys probably had that too. Like, oh my gosh, I want to read and get all these points and get the prizes and stuff, or be a part of this contest.
The pizza party.
The pizza party. There was like that machine where like dollars start flying up, and I'm all like, dude, I want to get in there. Yeah. So yeah, that was part of it. And also, I mean, like when I was growing up, Harry Potter and Aragon were the biggest things, and I wanted to be part of the conversation with my friends. And it got me into reading. So like, it's that feeling, and then comparing yourself to everybody else, that like, oh man, I really want to be, you know, watching your videos and watching other booktubers who talk about, you know, the John Gwynne books or Grace of Kings or anything like that. I'm like, man, I haven't gotten to those, and I want to like understand what everybody else is talking about. I think for the most part, it does uplift readers. I don't think there's anyone or any platform that really makes me feel like, man, I'm a terrible reader.
Yeah.
I do feel better though that social media gives me, like, you know, I think a lot of people just like hoard books and don't really read as much as they'd like to, as book dragons. I'm like, I like that. Thank you for making me feel better for my book purchasing.
You know, that is interesting that you bring that up, because I've noticed that there are people outside of BookTube, but that make more commentary type of videos, that will make videos about comparing fast fashion to the whole book dragon persona, we'll say, or hobby, you could call it. And it is interesting because I'm like, I feel like Booktube self-regulates. Every few years we have a consumerism conversation. We're like, are we going too far with how much we buy with books? And it's funny to have people outside be like, look at all those silly book people with their book hauls and stuff in there. And there's a part of me, I'm like, I mean, I could probably find your Stanley Cup stupid. You know what I mean? Like there's always something. Although granted, they probably are making fun of the Stanley Cup stuff too. But just it is interesting that you were saying, oh, Booktube made me feel a little bit better about that. And then there's other parts of the internet outside of Booktube that are kind of now. That is something I've told my mom before, like, oh, there's conversations about buying too many books. And my mom, as somebody who's outside of the bookish internet, is always like, what? She doesn't get it at all. She's like, they're books, they're not drugs.
That's how my family, no, that's exactly like, well, at least it's not drugs. At least you have a hobby that's like, good. It's like a good hobby to have. And I'm like, my wallet, my bank account say something different, but I appreciate you saying that. It makes me feel better.
I mean, at the end of each month, I'm like, book money or meth? It's kind of like, I'm like,
how you stay so lean,
I guess I'll.
I do want to highlight, I think Booktube educates and therefore uplifts readers. We're able to make more informed decisions about what we read. And I think my reading has increased because of it. And that makes me really happy because I know for myself, a big goal is to try and let people know about books they might be interested. Here's more than likely what you're going to get with this book. You can't be objective entirely because we all have our own personal feelings. But I think here's a relatively close to objective view of this book, and therefore now go as you will, spend your money as you'd like or your time as you'd like if you're checking out from the library and things. And so that makes me really happy to know that that's something that it seems Booktube as a whole is credited with. I am curious, Sean, though we haven't had a chance to have you answer the question. So do you think Booktube looks down on the average reader? Do you feel like it uplifts? What do you think?
Well, I guess to piggyback off of your introduction to the question about Book Talk and folks looking down on Book Talk books, I was unaware of this somewhat because, again, I haven't really watched Booktube in a while, but the ones I watched, I feel like it's kind of odd because they fall on the I read snootier things for sure end. But I've never seen them be like Book Talk books. I don't even know if Book Talk books like enters their brain ever. I don't know if they're even aware that's a thing. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't even know. So, I don't know. I don't. My experience has not been whoever reads Book Talk books is an idiot. I haven't really seen that. I think that is kind of not great. If that's your outlook. But I don't know. I don't even know if that has to do with the question. Let me look at the question. Do you find that Booktube looks down the average reader?
Well, and going back to,
I don't know what that means. I'm really stuck on average reader.
Well, that's what I was gonna add to is that based off what we were talking about average readers. So yesterday, Sean and I were talking a little bit about. I asked him, are there any prompts you want me to include or things like that? And we were talking about, is the average reader the airport reader, the person who stops in to grab a book before their plane, or maybe around Black Friday stops in and picks up a book. Oh, sorry, just let me. Those people usually are going to pick up the Emily Henrys. They're going to pick up the books at the front, basically the book of the month type books. And I do find that there's sometimes this like, oh, but those are for the masses feel. And maybe that's just a feeling I'm thinking it exists and doesn't actually, or maybe I'm just trying really hard to push back against the potential of that. Anyway, Sean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that. I guess that is conceivable. I think, what was I trying to say? I lost it. Oh, I think maybe if it looks down on the average reader, maybe it does in a roundabout way, right? I mean, like if it's like, just like I read 10 billion books this month. Like if you read like half a book, you're like, I suck. Maybe that's the way. It's not like intentional, but you know, if all you see is like, I read 10 billion books, and the next person's like, I read 20 billion books, you're just like, I'll never fit in. But for the second part, do you feel like BookTube uplifts readers? I don't know. Uplifts is a strong word. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if it
I will
uplifts.
say, you know, Marcus, you were saying as a kid, everybody's big thing was Harry Potter. And for a lot of people, if they are, quote, the average reader, they might do a reread of Harry Potter every year or something. And they, because they're not involved online with book content, they may not know the things that people on BookTube, it's like, we don't talk about this, or we don't, you know, there's like this sort of quiet, agreed upon, like that person said this problematic thing, or so, whether you agree with that statement or not, I think that is in existence on BookTube. And I have heard conversations, or I have seen conversations or comments sections that it's almost like they are in shock that the current landscape of BookTube is not the current landscape of people outside of BookTube when it comes to those sorts of things. And so I actually get nervous when I see online, if it's somebody that's not a BookTube type of person, but they make different kinds of content online and they're getting into reading. And you'll see them checking out Sarah J. Maas, and you'll see them being like, oh, I can't wait for my kids to read Harry Potter. And you'll see them saying those things. And then they'll be like, oh, I heard about BookTube. I kind of want to start a BookTube channel or something like that. And there's always a part of me that's like, oh, that person's going to get ripped apart. And that makes me sad, that idea that there wouldn't be some understanding that there are different circles and different, not to say you're, go ahead.
So maybe there's some confusion on my part, because you did say BookTube I could replace with community. I guess when I think BookTube, I'm thinking like individual booktubers, but are you saying like maybe the consumers of BookTube, you know, viewers, consistent viewers who are also big readers? Is that kind of what you mean? If they look down the average reader
as a whole,
because I can for sure see there being lots of people out there who are butts about, you know, how much they read. You know, it's not like a crazy notion, but I guess at the end of the day, I'm like, who cares? I don't know. Like, I just think that's weird. I think that is like you've made this too much about like who you are as a person. If it's like, I read 100 books in a year, I'm amazing. You're like, it's fine.
Right. Making
like,
it your personality kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just the number of books you read. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to highlight though good things, because I feel like I'm thinking about all the ways in which I hope people aren't. I think also too, I've noticed recently a big thing about booktubers, why they leave BookTube, or why BookTube ruins reading for them, or things like that. And so maybe in seeing those things, I have a certain perception, and that's not actually collectively how most people would view it, which is why it's fun to have different perspectives in this chat. But I do want to highlight good things. So we already had the really great point about how it helps to inform, and as a whole, that can make people read more often, and, you know, hopefully their money is better spent, things like that. But what are some of the other really good things that you found as a result, either that you've experienced personally or that you've noticed? Sean, what do you think?
I've just found some good books through watching videos. That's about it. I think that's the thing, is like, even when I was watching more, I'm not sure I don't know if I ever engaged. You know, it's not like I was like commenting, be like, "But I love that book," or "I can't wait to read it." You know, like, I don't know. I was like, "That sounds interesting." Move on. You know, like
algorithm, Sean.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Help your favorite creators.
But yeah, I that's about it. I found some good books. It's kind of sad.
I mean, yeah, discovery, I think, is a big one for a lot of people, and just in general.
I think sorry, not to cut you off, but like another thing though is I go to Booktube more for reviews of things I've already read. You know, like if I'm like, oh, what does this person think of this book? Because I didn't get it, or you know, whatever. Like, or I thought it was horrible, or I thought it was amazing. I think I rarely, you know, am just like, I'm just gonna watch this video of a book I've never heard of, unless like it sounds like maybe I Google it. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Maybe I'll, if there's like a non-spoiler part, I'll listen to that or something.
That's the thing. A lot of people you watch do really in-depth spoiler
really big spoilers, yeah.
Which is very different.
I have to make sure that I've actually read it before engaging.
Besides discovery, I think it's fair to say that we've made some friends through Booktube, including Marcus.
Woohoo! I made it.
And I always thought when I first started and I would hear people say that, I always was like, no, that's not true. There's no way you're actually friends with these people. But looking at, if I were to pull up a list of my friends, so many of them are through Booktube, which is really fun. So I think in that way, there is a sense of community. And I do think that Booktube can be very entertaining, even though I was talking about there is sometimes you can view things through a negative lens when it comes to certain kinds of videos and stuff. At the other end of the spectrum is that those videos are very entertaining. And I try not to take anything too seriously. I try to always look at things charitably. So if somebody's making a really long video going super in depth, and I've participated in making those kinds of videos too, you never know. Even if somebody loved the book, they might still find it really funny, or it might just be, it can be good for people to hear other people's perspectives on things. So I think in that way, it can be a lot of fun. But Marcus, now that we've stolen the obvious answers, what good things have come out of Booktube for you?
No, I mean, definitely for me, it's the engagement. Like I said, my friends don't really like to read. Mostly, like my friends, it's sports and video games. So for me, reading, like I don't really have a whole lot of like in-depth discussions. I mean, really, like growing up, it was movies and TV shows that I would discuss with, like, as a family. We would like discuss, what we thought about it, why, and let's really get in depth with it. And so when it comes to books, it's the same thing. I want to like discuss it and like see what other people think and engage in that discussion. So for me, that's what it really helps with. I mean, like I remember when I know I talk about this all the time, but The House in the Cerulean Sea came out. I was like, this is the greatest. I love this book so much. And I saw you had a review for it, and I was like, cool. Like I got like the Booktube person is catching on and going to read the book that I read. Like I felt like I was on the ground floor, even though you didn't like it that much. It's okay. But I mean, like, yeah, I felt like I had started. I was like, hey, wow, you're welcome, everybody. I started this. Yeah, but
that book is popular because of you.
Exactly.
And
because I picked it up. I went into Barnes and Noble. They didn't have it out front. And I'm like, hey, where is this? I know it came out today.
So you like Booktube because it's a boost to your ego?
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, it's just, it feels cool that you're like, sometimes you can have it like, hey, that feeling when some people are like, yeah, I knew that band before they got big.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can kind of feel like that, where you were there, like when they were indie or like smaller, I really don't actually feel that way. It's just
I don't get that feeling very often. It's not like I'm like, okay, I knew William Faulkner was going to go big.
Right. I mean, I really love debuts. I love debuts. I like seeing like where people started and like what that journey can kind of look like. People will be like, oh, my first book was terrible. I can't believe you even read it. And I'm like, well, I liked it. I thought it was really good, But yeah, it's the engagement part of it. It definitely discovery. That's part of it too. But for me, it's really like, getting to comment and talk and just see what other people think of it. Definitely what you said, Sean, about like the in-depth analysis with some books. I mean, like, I don't understand, like everything that goes into a book, even something that I would say is like mainstream or like fairly standard to understand is, like Mistborn, that a lot of people in this community have read and really enjoyed. I know there's stuff that I missed, so I go back and like watch, Elle's review or spoiler review of Mistborn. Like, okay, that's right, I'm remembering, and it helps me kind of retain the things that I did just read. and help me kind of formulate my own, thoughts and feelings on it a little bit more than because maybe I missed something. So I think Booktube helps with that too.
So bouncing off a couple things you said, even though there's a whole conversation about do we read so often that we're not even actually reading and then we don't remember anything and stuff, I think being on Booktube helps me remember, because then I'm talking about it and then I'm talking about it with other people, and then potentially sometimes there's spoiler chats or things like that. So I feel like it helps in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the creation side of making book content, what you were saying, Marcus, about that feeling of, well, I was there at the start. Even though it always feels arrogant, I'm not by any means trying to credit myself with an author's success, but to know that you can help, even in some small way, make an author's career better, that's a really good feeling. And then the other side of it too, when you see people that say they're getting more into reading as a result of Booktube, that's really exciting too. Not because I want everybody to have the same interests as me, but just because I think so many of us know how fulfilling reading can be, how helpful it can be in escapism sometimes, how much it can enrich our lives. We just want to share that with other people, those great feelings.
Yeah.
And I think Booktube, it contributes to that a lot, which is exciting. Now, I do want to bounce to something that you specifically were kind of mentioning, Marcus, which is, do you feel FOMO more? I meant or less, sorry, because of Booktube. So the reason I'm asking this is because I think that I've seen people say, like, I just can't keep up and I want to be a part of the conversation, but I can't be. So then they feel FOMO as a result of that. Or, oh, I see people getting all these editions and I don't have that subscription. It makes me feel like I'm missing out on these beautiful books or things like that. But then on the flip side, like you were talking about, you would have felt FOMO had you not been a part of the conversation at all. So do you think it makes you feel FOMO more or less?
I would. It depends, and obviously it depends on the person. But for me, it just depends on the series. So, like the biggest ones, like Stormlight Archive. I have not read the Stormlight Archive. I've read the Mistborn trilogy. I want to read Era 2. I want to read like pretty much everything Brandon Sanderson's written. But I know the Stormlight Archive is the biggest one right now, and I haven't read any of those because they're huge, and I'm terrified. But don't be seen like, man, no, they're so good, and I believe that they're really good, and I want to get into them. And it's that's where I feel FOMO. When it some of the John Gwynne books, like the big Joe Abercrombie, I haven't read those books yet. Man, hopefully no one says anything in the comments here. It's like, man, this guy's read nothing. Yeah, no,
he's not a real reader.
Exactly. See, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, I'm not even an average reader.
Gross.
But, yeah, it depends on the series, because other things, I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan, so I've read all of his books, I think, except for one. I've read a lot of his comics. So like for me, like if I don't know, if there was a channel really dedicated to a lot of Neil Gaiman work, I'd feel like, hey, yeah, cool, I'm a part of that conversation. But it's the stuff that's really big that I haven't read personally. I'm like, okay, yeah, like I feel like I should really get on that.
I think, someone like my friend Roger, he definitely is more of a completionist. Even if he's not loving a series, he'll push through it because he'll say, I just really want to be a part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think I used to have that mindset a little bit more, and now I don't. I'm just thinking, if I'm not enjoying this even a little bit, there's so many other books to read. And usually the part of the conversation are for things that are already popular. So I don't feel bad jumping ship and being like, it wasn't for me, but it's for a lot of other people, and that's great. So I think I used to feel it more. And I think I feel it when I start watching my friends' videos, because then I'm like, oh, that sounds really good, and I really want to talk to them about it, and they seem like they also want to talk about, and then I'm like, I should message them and be like, I'm gonna try to read this sometime soon, and then I can get too caught up in that, and then suddenly my TBR is way too long, and in that sense, I suppose it does cause it. But I feel like at this point, I already put too many books on my reading lists. And I think something that's helped me is I try really hard to not see too much of what other people think before I review something or talk about something, just to ensure that I don't have that bias coming in beforehand, positive or negative. And so that weirdly helps, because then by the time I've read it, then I'm not going to be missing out because I got it. I think maybe the only thing is if a library hold is taking forever to come in and I'm like, man, I really want to read this like right now. Everybody else is reading it right now. There's maybe that, but I would say I definitely don't feel it. I think if anything, I feel it less because I get to just talk about it if I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about this with people? But Sean, since you are the resident least amount of watch time person, how would you say it? I think you felt that a little bit
more, so much more while watching. I think like there's, I mean, I guess this is what it's the fear of missing out. It's what it is. I think people describe these books as like these transcendental experiences. You know, like if you read this book, your life is going to change. And you're just like, oh, I want my life to change. You know, so like and there's also a little bit of like I guess I'm still that kid who wants to compete and jump in the money machine, like Mark was talking about. There's a level of competitiveness to it, because I feel like with some of the books I read, I'm not saying this is healthy, but it's like, oh, you've read Infinite Jest? Try Gravity's Rainbow. And then I, read Gravity's Rainbow. It's like, Gravity's Rainbow is a piece of cake. Have you read The Recognitions? And then you're just like, no, I haven't. Dude, The Recognitions has been taunting me for years. It is on my bookshelf out there. I look at it, it scares me to death. But there's a part of me is like, I really should read The Recognitions. It's been sitting there for years. It's really long. I'm not going to get it. But, there's that part of me that's like, but if I read The Recognitions, one, I've read The Recognitions, but two, it might be a transcendental experience and it'll change my life forever.
And what if you miss out on that?
Yeah, exactly. You can't miss out on that. So yeah. But now that I've watched less, I mean,
the day of reckoning
my book
comes.
buying has dropped significantly. I mean, like I have enough transcendental experiences potentially on my bookshelf. I can read those.
Well, Sean, you encompass these two things. Does it impact your spending, and does it impact what you pick up? So spending really quick, because we're married and I know for a fact, I don't think Booktube affected your spending, but for a little bit, Sean was in a comics Facebook group where people would sell secondhand their comics. And I think in that time period is probably the most Sean has purchased.
That's probably true.
Yeah. So, which you got good deals on them, but
I did.
I think had you not been in that group, obviously.
Oh yeah, not even no.
Yeah, Marcus, I kind of think I know the answer to this question. Does Booktube impact your spending?
No.
Looks away.
Yeah, no, don't
make.
I'm not sweating or touching my face or anything like that. Yeah, of course it does. I mean, if there's, especially when, so I think it kind of ties back into what you were saying, Sean, like that, or the FOMO thing. Like, there's something about reading a book or something, just absorbing some sort of content that just like changes your life. Like, it just changes the way you view things. And like, I am chasing that again. Like, I need that feeling again. And so when I see, a review or somebody talking about a book or a movie, whatever it may be, and there's like that legitimate like passion behind this thing that they watched or just this thing that they consumed, that impacts my spending, because I'm like, all right, cool. I want that. I want that right now. I want that really badly, because there's nothing else like it. So when I do see that, especially on Booktube, yes, because I go and look for it right away. It's a problem, but yes, I do. Yeah.
So, Buddy reading The Recognitions by William Gaddis. That's what I heard. Okay.
If it's that kind of experience, let's do it.
I don't know if it is. It might be a torturous experience.
And that's it. It's true. It's like if you do that, you're like, oh man, I spent all that time, but you want that feeling.
Yeah.
I Well, I guess I have a follow-up question. So you would definitely say, both of you, that it impacted. Do you think, though, you'd go as far as to say you would blame BookTube, change the word a little bit, you would blame BookTube for your spending? Because that has a different connotation to it.
I think to an extent, but I'm also pretty good at just picking up stuff wandering around. I'm not like one. What I'm trying to say, I'm not a person who's like, I have to have heard of this to like. I'll just pick up something, but that sounds interesting, and then like put it in my, whatever.
The reason I ask is,
I don't know.
I was jokingly saying earlier, although kind of serious, that we self-regulate when it comes to the consumerism conversation, because there have been times where people have said they basically feel that BookTube is to blame for them, going into debt, or for them buying things that they didn't maybe actually want. So that's the reason I'm asking if you would use that word, that you would blame BookTube.
Self-control is good too.
Impulse control, yeah.
Healthy balance. I don't think I would be like, if my choices were like starvation or a new book,
Rent.
I don't think I'd be like, no,
I have to have that book though.
Yeah, like, so
that transcendental experience or food.
Yeah. But
you could have.
Hey, look, that's a big really choice. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, is it somewhat to blame? Potentially.
I think
I think more than anything though is now we're getting really philosophical here, but I don't know. I think there is a culture of owning books. I could read anything I saw online for free. I just go to the library, or if it's not your library, you can find a way to get it shipped to the library.
In
my circumstance,
right?
That is my situation. I don't need any of these things, especially these big expensive ones up here. I can read them online now very easily. So there's not really a whole lot of reason for me to own them. So yeah, I mean, I think some of it is like wanting your bookshelf to be
aesthetically pleasing.
Well, maybe not even that, but like what's the word I'm looking for?
It's like a reflection of you in a sense.
No, it's still not what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
like
an indication of status.
Like at a museum, curated, like, that's not necessarily a good thing, right? I mean, like, it could be. I guess if someone came over and was like, "Oh, you have such interesting taste," and then I'd be like, "Yes, look at all those interesting books that I haven't read." Like at the end of the day, I haven't read a lot of them, so another bad thing.
I do try for the books that are behind me, for them to be books I have picked up.
Boo! Get out of here. Get off the stage.
Well, it helps that I have multiple editions of the same series. So it feels like Strange the Dreamers over it, like multiple Strange the Dreamers. And but anyway, there's like Witcher up there and Witcher down there and things like that. Shades. But I think for me, it's tough because you want to find that balance. Marcus, you were talking about, and I think a lot of people like when they see that passion from a person, and especially for the hidden gems, like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I feel like more people, and I do think a lot of people get passionate when they feel like something is undervalued, underhyped, because they want to lift up that author and their works. And at the end of the day, if nobody buys books, those authors don't have a career. So there is a balance. But when you're that passionate and you're that excited and you're trying to basically tell everybody all the time, hey, check out this book, then people might pick it up and be like, I didn't really want this though. And so it's kind of from this side of things, sort of a balancing act of like, oh, I don't want to have to contain my enthusiasm because I am really excited about this, but also maybe other people wouldn't really actually want it. So, but I think where it becomes irresponsible is when it genuinely feels like the creator is just trying to get you to purchase something. and they don't actually feel any kind of way, which is a rare thing. I think most people who are making book content care about books. But if somebody is hyping something up because there is some kind of financial incentive, or it will lead to more views, or you're catering to your audience, you're essentially doing fan service, because that in turn will lead to patrons, or it will lead to more people watching your videos, and then thus trusting your recommendations because, hey, they like exactly what I like. And you're like, well, sometimes that's, to use Sean's word, that's curated. Sometimes that's something that there's thought put into. And in that sense, I feel like go ahead, you can be a little harsher, but at the same time, don't just assume. And I guess for most people, they would have no way of knowing. But I just feel like as a creator, there is that, like, you need to be genuine with what you're saying and how you feel. Otherwise, it just is kind of gross to try and just make. It's like the equivalent of people hyping up some fill in the blank product, because, you know, at the end of the day, that's what books are. They're products. So I think we think of it more like a product when it comes to other things, and we don't as much with books.
But I still think as a creator, you're not saying you have to go own this book, you know.
Well, that's why I guess it's maybe more accurate to say for like special editions and things. If it's like, oh, this company is making this book. I mean, that's very specific, but you're right. They're not necessarily saying like, go out and buy this. So that's a good point. Marcus, I feel like Sean and I have been going back and forth, but what are your thoughts on, would you assign the word blame rather than impact?
I wouldn't blame Booktube. I mean, it obviously influences a lot of the things that I purchase. But like you said, for the most part, almost everything that I do actually have, I could get for free. It would make a lot more sense in my life to get the things that were free instead of buying them and not reading them. But there is something, like, for me, there is something like when I don't know if you ever read this when you were younger, or just in general, the book Inkheart was a book that I read when I was a kid. And I remember Cornelia Funk, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tobias Funke? Is that?
Yeah.
Is that what
exactly.
it is?
Yeah. Yeah. But that scene she describes in the beginning of how her and her dad like have a ton of books, and they're like, you could walk around the house and you're just like, there was a book there. Like, you could just grab one anywhere. I have always, like, for whatever reason, wanted that, like, just books everywhere. I like the idea of having books everywhere, like your own personal library, and having it be mine or shared. It doesn't make sense financially for me, but I just like enjoy that. I mean, you know, when we first met, like, you know, Sean's like, "Wow, we've got a good Jonathan Franzen collection there." I'm like, "See, now you know that I'm interested in Jonathan Franzen, and I want to read Jonathan Franzen. May not have yet, but you can tell that, hey, behind the surface, Marcus is really trying to, you know, better himself."
Hey, the corrections is so good. Just
yeah, exactly.
So
I want to read that one so bad. Yeah.
I do think when it comes to the purchasing aspect of things, that the three of us, given where we live, are all very spoiled to have very great used bookstores. And that's not everyone's experience. And so a lot of people are only able to get books if they buy them full price. And thus
or Amazon.
Yeah. And thus they're going to likely spend a lot more, because a lot of the backlist fantasy I have that's, you know, on the never ending TBR, I got for like nothing at here. I have Guards, which I've read now, but I have this. It was $5 for this copy. So, you know, in that case, and some of them are less, and especially with the ones that are those trade paperback types, if you see multiple at Bookman's, you're like, which one's the cheapest? Because some of them are like $7, and some of them are $4.50 or $3.50, and you're like $3.50.
Yeah, thank you.
And if I like it, if I like
those
it,
are the ones with the yellow pages at the edge. You're like, I don't care. Those are mine.
Yep. So, but I think too, I mentioned this, Sean, while you were talking, that it is sort of a form of self-expression. Also, like this, it's like, if there's a piece of art that you really love that you want to hang in your house, you know, you could just take a picture of it and look at it on your phone if you wanted, but you want it in your home because sort of like, that's probably a stupid example, but what Marcus was saying about just that the joy that you feel in your own home for your personal library. That's kind of fun. And I know for me, pretty much anybody that comes over, I'm like, come look at my books. Not because because I'm like trying to go off, but because I'm like, is there anything you want to borrow? Or, you know, because I get excited. Because Marcus, you don't have to spend money on books pretty much ever again, because you can just be like, hey, can I borrow that? And
Yeah,
the answer will always be yeah. I'm never gonna be like, no.
exactly.
Unless you do something awful. But I don't foresee that. But okay, this one we touched on earlier. Has Booktube ever made you feel bad about yourself as a reader or just in general? Kind of a little bit relates.
No.
I know Sean's felt bad about it. Don't lie. I'm just kidding.
No, not really.
Sean,
I mean, like, go ahead.
I think there.
Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Am I frozen or is she frozen?
No, I think it's just Danielle.
I think it's me. Can you see me?
Oh, yeah, there you
Yep.
are.
Okay. I was just saying, I think there have been times where you have said to me, like, I don't really feel like I'm smart enough for this book.
Oh,
And
all the time.
yeah, and that makes me kind
All
of
the
sad
time.
because I'm like, that's not true. And a big thing about the books that Sean reads is a lot of it is references. And I'm like, references does not equal intelligence. You're not smart because you knew this random piece of information.
Yes, it does. You take
that
that
relates.
Yes, you take that back.
Anyway, so I think I wouldn't say you feel bad about yourself. Maybe it's humbling. Maybe it's good. I don't know. But I don't think you walk around like you're so confident you're the smartest person in every room. And then Booktube has humbled you and now you're a more likable human. I wouldn't say that's the feeling. I would say that your tone when you're like, I don't know, I'm just like too dumb for this. I'm like, that's not true. So I think in that sense, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of that happening, but I'm going to trust your memory. That happened.
It's happened before. Marcus, has Booktube ever made you feel bad about yourself in any capacity?
Not intentionally. Like I said, with the number of books that I don't read, yeah, like, you know, that's where Booktube, like, man, I compare myself and I'm like, man, I really should be reading more. Obviously, like, yeah, no, it's not my job, and I have other interests, too many, and so I should spend more time reading. But that's the only thing that like makes me, I guess, feel bad, like number of books and stuff like that. I think the only thing that Booktube like might make me feel bad, you kind of talked about it, was with Sean, is like sometimes when I try and read some classic books like Don Quixote, or I think I even tried reading David Copperfield, and I'm like, this isn't like difficult, but it's not like I feel like I'm not understanding it. Like I feel like I'm not fully, yeah. Like am I not smart enough, or is this just a language? Like the language was this way then, or is this how prolific their prose is? You know, with these kinds of classic books, and I just like
Then you see a video that's like classics for beginners, and you're like,
right,
that's
exactly.
all ones I tried.
Yeah, and then like sometimes there's some videos that like help me understand. I'm like, oh, cool, thank you. But 100%, yeah, I'm like, man, I do feel kind of dumb, but I mean, it's a give and take, I guess. Sometimes Booktube does help. Otherwise, other times I'm like, yeah, I don't get it.
I don't think Booktube as a community has ever made me feel bad. I think it's just as somebody who makes videos to say that for how many times now, you get the inevitable mean comments or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that can sit with me sometimes. I know when my dad was dying, somebody was making a comment kind of making light of my sadness, and that I was just like, I weirdly wasn't upset about that one, because I'm like, you're just such an obviously unwell person to leave a comment like that. It's more the ones that I'm like, oh dang it, that's kind of accurate, you know, like if I happen to have mentioned a book a couple times in recent videos and someone's like, you talk about the same books all the time, I'm just like, oh, dang it, it just happened to happen this particular month, okay, but I don't normally. I'm constantly trying to read. Like there's that gets in my head. Like I don't read enough, obviously, because then there's not enough variety, and so in that way. But that's not. I don't feel like that's Booktube. I've never been like I don't read enough. I'm not a real reader. I wouldn't say Booktube has made me.
But do you feel like you have to read more? Like, has Booktube made you feel like you have to read more?
I wouldn't
like
say
you couldn't just spend a month on a book, just taking your sweet time, really enjoying it. Or could you?
I wouldn't though. I think that pressure. I wouldn't even call it pressure. I just think I would be putting things on myself, and not Booktube. I would be like, oh, I'm not reading enough. I need to make more time to read. I think there's a sense of I have made myself feel very guilty before, and feeling. I think a difficult thing for me is balancing writing, seeing as it's something that I am really passionate about, but it's not my job, and Booktube, which is. And I think that can make me feel really guilty. Like I'm not contributing enough to either thing. So I'm always behind. I'm never excelling in either area. That can make me feel bad. But again, I wouldn't say that that's Booktube itself. So yeah, I don't think Booktube itself has made me feel bad. Or maybe I'm just being overly generous and I'm deciding that the negative side of Booktube isn't actually Booktube and thus it's not Booktube's fault. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe you asked me on a different day and I'd be like, Booktube sucks. I think there have been times where I have, as somebody who really likes stand-up comedy, which is not always, stand-up comedy is constantly like pushing the line, and it's obviously an art form that's meant for a specific time and place, things like that. That I think sometimes humor is not always like the same. Mm-hmm. And then I can feel kind of bad, like, oh man, I didn't mean it like that, if I said, not that I'm hilarious and I'm comparable to comedians or anything like that, but I think I would feel bad if I made somebody feel bad. Then I'd be like, oh shoot, I'm sorry. So maybe in that way. But again, I feel like that's just part of being online. That's not necessarily a Booktube specific thing. But this is maybe potentially the juiciest question, so I wanted to save it for the end. Has Booktube ever potentially altered how you feel about a book, positive or negative? So maybe if you'd read it without all the hype, you wouldn't have loved it as much or you wouldn't have disliked it as much. Marcus.
That's a
so
great
I'll give two examples. So this is a case of me standing strong. Okay, no matter how much Cormac McCarthy bros tell me that Suttree is actually his magnum opus, I will forever say Suttree was kind of awful. Not awful, but it's not great.
But like comparatively to his other work. Is that what you mean? Or just in general? Like it's just not that good. Okay, yeah.
It's really overwritten, and that's coming from me. And I like overwritten. So that's
right. We were talking about a book that we want. It's like 956 pages. You're like, let's do it.
I read it with my dad, and he very quickly was like, I don't like this. And I was like, come on, Dad. It's really good. And then I was like, it's not as good as I think it is. So that's me standing strong. I do think, keeping with Cormac McCarthy, I think I do like Blood Meridian more after having watched people talk about it than I did the actual experience of reading it. I think the experience of reading it has its glorious, amazing moments, and it's also really dull moments. But I think watching people talk about it, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm understanding this more. So yes, it altered my feelings. Right. Did you catch all that? I don't think she caught any of that. Oh.
I caught all of it.
Yeah. All of it? Oh, okay. What was the first one I said?
Yeah. Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Suttree.
And Suttree. Satri.
Yeah. Do you miss my private chat message? My my battery is running low, so I was just trying to adjust some things.
Oh, I see.
But I still heard everything. Yeah, Sean. I'm still here. Booktuber L made me feel bad because she wasn't listening when I was talking.
Yeah.
Although
Booktube
you've
has now
listened to me
negatively
talk
impacted me.
You've listened to me talk about Satri in real life, you know, so you've heard.
You talk about everything you've read in real life. So, it might sound different. It's because now it's coming through my headphones as opposed to my mic. So hopefully the sound didn't suffer. But Marcus, would you say that it's altered how you feel about a book?
I mean, I've been trying to think. I mean, most of the time, like I feel like a lot of the YouTube videos that I'll watch, like based off of books. Okay, sorry. I think I finally got one. The Dark Tower. There's a lot of mixed feelings on that entire series as a whole, like which one's the best, which one's not. And I obviously have my own like feelings on different books in the series, but as a whole, I think the series is phenomenal. I know for a lot of people, Stephen King with his endings and stuff, there's problems, and I acknowledge that there's problems with that series and the ending, but I think as a whole, I think it's great. But I think a lot of people on like Booktube, you know, are like, you know, it's a really poor, just not executed well ending. And I'm kind of like Sean with that series. I'm like, I'm standing strong. Like, this is great. But
so both of you are like, it has not. I have not allowed it to affect my
life
whatsoever.
But I also had another one where I said, did you hear my other one?
Blood Meridian, right?
Blood Meridian, yeah.
Yeah, I did, Sean. I'm
all
sorry.
Right, just checking.
I was trying to make fun of you guys.
I mean, altering. So I think there's been some books where, okay, like I really did love it, and then maybe watching some videos like, okay, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought. Like there are some issues, and I think I even like finishing it would be like, oh, there were some issues that I had noticed, but I kind of ignored them when I was reading. I'm like, I'm really focusing on the good stuff, and then like watching the videos, like, okay, wait, maybe those problems like that I had really are more prevalent than I initially thought. I'm trying to think though of a book specifically. You know, where that happened, but I know that has happened to me where like, oh no, it was really good, and then like I watch videos, I'm like, okay, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it really
I think
wasn't.
it's fair to say maybe if you wouldn't have noticed something, but then it just based off of your own life experiences, that if somebody then were to point out, you know, like this is why this actually I find a little offensive, we'll say, as an example. I think it's completely fair on one hand to be like, I enjoyed the book. I can't change that. That was my experience. Otherwise, I'm being dishonest. I can also acknowledge what you're saying. And maybe if you were to reread it, then suddenly you'd be like, wow, okay, now that I've heard that, it's completely changed. I think that's possible. I think there are also times though where people you can't really ask them to feel the same way you feel. And as we've said in a fair amount of prompts here, I think it's a balance of being understanding of other people's perspectives, considerate, trying to take that in, but then also respecting that you yourself are your own individual and you're going to come to things from a different place too.
I think for me, if I am told it's really good, going back to my transcendental experience, if that's like the level of book, I want it. You know, I'm going to err on the side of like, you know, it's almost like a denial, you know, like I didn't have a transcendental experience, but I really wish I did. I loved it. So I think I probably lean towards if I've heard it's good or like a classic or something, I'm probably going to give it more of a benefit of the doubt than if it's just like a new release. A new release, I might quicker just be like, nah, and just like, whatever.
That's what I was going to say for myself is that if I've been told over and over and over again that something, just wait, you'll see it gets so good.
Right.
Then I'm probably more likely to power through expecting it to be good. Whereas if I were to read in a vacuum and there was no outside influence, I'd be like, I don't like this. And I maybe would stop sooner. I think Booktube has affected how much.
That's the Perdido Street station. That's what's going to happen is I've been hyping that up for years and you're going to read it and be like, that was no good. And I'm like,
I also know that we have pretty different reading tastes, so I think that helps. But
Yeah.
I do think that I think Booktube has affected how much I'm willing to DNF something. I think I would DNF more often if it wasn't for Booktube, but I'm like, well, but I feel like I have to understand fully, you know. So I think I don't DNF as much, even though Booktube does encourage. I think a lot of people on Booktube are like, if you don't like it, stop reading. But I think on the other, I think it can go both ways though. If somebody's been telling me over and over and over again that something is amazing, sometimes I can be like, no. You know,
like, no, it's not.
I don't think so. So, and then I can go, it's like if something gets really hyped, the expectation is impossible to meet. There's no way it can be as good.
I think it's just really hard for me to like kind of admit like I didn't really like that. You know, like it might take me like a day or two. Like
that's not that long.
Well, no, I just mean like I have to really think about it. An example of it not taking a day or two for both of us was the movie Killers of the Flower Moon. I think we both walked out of the theater kind of quietly, and I don't know which one of us said the first thing, but it might have been you. You're like, I didn't really like that. And then I was like, I didn't really either. You know, like I might have been like, if you had been like, that was pretty good, I might have been like, yeah, you know, like trying to find
I think I
something.
walked out and said, how was that movie? What was it, like 3 hours? I think I said like, how was that 3 hours? I think I said something to that effect, and you're like, yeah. And we both kind of tentatively were like, because I think we were wrestling with how we felt about it too. Like, I don't know if I thought that was very good. And then we were looking, and pretty much everybody, not that this isn't typically something that Sean and I subscribe to, like the book is always better. But Marcus, you know, because we've talked to you about it, and now you've read Killers of the Flower Moon, so you know, but this isn't going to turn into a chat for that. But having watched the movie after reading, you really realize how much was left out, and you're like, why? Anyway, so I think that played a big role. But we don't need to go super into that. But yeah, Sean, that's a good example. I want to read this comment here. I DNF more since watching Booktube, since I see just how many other good books there are, and I shouldn't waste time on ones I don't enjoy. And that could be a whole other thing too, is that does the book community encourage us to just like move on to the next thing? Sort of, Sean, your question of like, do you feel like it doesn't allow you to just sit and enjoy because there is that constant, like, I got to find the next thing. I got to find the next thing. I do think that I think something that's fair to say is maybe I liked something well enough, but then since reading it, I've read so many good things that it reminds me like, oh, I don't know if that book was as good as I thought it was at the time, since now I've read so many other things and I'm like, oh, I like this even more. So, and I think when you're constantly assessing how many series you're in the middle of, which isn't really a thing for Sean, but when you're assessing and you only have so much time, you really have to start to narrow down, and it can almost feel like you're changing your feelings. But at the end of the day, I think an honest answer is yes. In some capacity, Booktube affects either positively or negatively. And it's just how self-aware we are of it and how much we let it affect us. I think that's going to be different from person to person. And I think kind of tying it back to our conversation at the beginning, there are a lot of people that are almost like Sarah J. Maas apologists or things like that, where that was the thing that got them into reading, and maybe they would say typically that they love it, but then now after kind of gauging, you know, they're like, where's the line here? After gauging that, they're like, I mean, I don't like it as much now that I've, you know, like read more. It's almost like what I was saying, except for maybe deep down they do, but they don't want to admit they still love it because it's not the thing they're supposed to like. So I think that can happen too, and that makes me a little sad, but I guess that is what it is. Marcus, have you found that that's something that's happened to you where you really love something? You're like, oh, I guess everybody says it sucks. Can you think of a time that that's happened?
I mean, with movies, absolutely. But with books, I'm trying to think of like a book specifically, but like you brought up like Sarah J. Maas. Like I know my wife feels that way about like the Sarah J. Maas books. Like that's gotten her back into reading, and she like flew through those, loves them. Mm-hmm. But I mean, she is like, with the Throne of Glass series, she's like, I don't get why everybody loves this so much. She loves the ACOTAR series, but the Throne of Glass, she's like, I don't get it. But that is what's gotten her back into reading, like really voraciously reading. So, but yeah, like, so, other people who read and stuff, she's like, oh yeah, like Sarah J. Maas, I read that. Yeah, she tries to keep quiet about it. But like, I mean, for me, sometimes, sometimes like Stephen King, because a lot of it can just be really weird and, like just mainstream, I guess. Like, I guess sometimes depending on how popular it is, like, oh yeah, like some of my family members, I'm like, oh, you read a lot of Stephen King, like thinking I don't really branch out too much. So I think depending on that, or fantasy in general, like, oh yeah, I read Lord of the Rings. Like, oh, okay. Do you read nonfiction? That's kind of like people's, response. So like, oh yeah, I'm reading fiction. That's that's kind of for kids kind of thing. So
I read this self-help book that talks about how to live a fulfilled life. When you're
right,
like, I figured it out. I'm reading the things I like.
Right. You should be reading books on how to make sure your money goes somewhere, not kids stories, that kind of thing. So I think in general, just fantasy.
The most important thing in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great note to end on. Screw books. Let's all talk about where we should invest. But anyway, on that lovely note, was there anything either of you wanted to add before we wrap it up? No.
Booktube helps. It's my own choice to, go and buy whatever, everyone's talking about on YouTube or Booktube. But yeah, read what you want. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get them.
Sean, final thoughts.
Final thoughts.
You don't have to.
If this video gets 100 likes, I'll read the recognitions.
Oh yeah.
William Gaddis.
I'm sure everybody watching is like, I've been waiting for Sean to pick that up.
Finally. You have to
stream
it. Live stream while you're reading that.
Every sprint from here on out has to be reading that book.
It's sad. It's been taunting me enough where I've considered picking it up, like soonish.
Next time we talk.
Well, we gotta all buddy read. We were talking about buddy reading The Golden Compass finally. So yes. Sean, that has to come first.
Then the recognitions.
Then the recognitions.
A nice mix there.
Yeah.
Well, this was lots of fun. Thank you both for joining. And I will be very curious what other people feel about this, because I'm sure there's so many other points that we completely forgot about or didn't bring up. So I'm very curious everybody else's perspective on things. But thanks for those of you who tuned in and added your thoughts as we went. And thanks to Sean and Marcus for joining for this chat. But we'll see you all later. Bye.